Battle of Lepanto, the battle that changed Europe forever. What happens when the largest naval armada since antiquity sails into battle, armed with ambition, arrogance, and a few wildly inaccurate scouting reports? Why did the Ottoman Empire, undefeated at sea for over a century, suddenly find itself outgunned, outmaneuvered, and out of luck? And how did a ragtag coalition of Christian powers, who could barely agree on lunch, unite to deliver one of the most shocking naval upsets in history? So grab your tricorn hat, tighten your sash, and prepare to sail into one of the bloodiest, most pivotal battles of the 16th century. Because once you start this journey, you won't want to miss a single wave. Now let's dive in. In the year of our Lord 1571, the Ottoman fleet was the maritime equivalent of a teenager with a new sports car and no speed limits. They roamed the Ionian Sea with impunity, raiding Venetian islands like they were picking apples from a neighbor's orchard. The Venetians, meanwhile, were clutching their pearls and their trade routes, praying for a miracle, or at least a decent alliance. The Ottomans, under the ever-ambitious Sokolu Mehmed Pasha, had their eyes on Cattaro, a strategic gem in northern Dalmatia. The plan? Grab it before winter tucked the campaign season into bed. But alas, the siege was about as successful as a soggy matchstick, short-lived and utterly ineffective. The Ottomans withdrew, grumbling and plotting. With winter storms brewing like a tempestuous espresso, the Ottoman fleet tucked itself into Greek harbors for shelter. But on September 9th, Sokolu Mehmed Pasha, sipping his morning intrigue in Constantinople, sent a spicy order. Back to sea, lads. Cattaro must fall, and you'll winter there, not in cozy Lepanto. There was, however, one teensy hiccup. The Holy League fleet, a Christian coalition of maritime muscle, had been hot on the heels of Uluç Ali's raiders, chasing them from the North Adriatic to Greece like a pack of righteous bloodhounds. By the time Sokolu's order arrived, the Holy League had reached Otranto, effectively blocking the Ottoman path to Cattaro. To reach their destination, the Ottomans would have to punch through 206 galleys and 6 Venetian galleasses, floating fortresses that made regular galleys look like dinghies with attitude. But Muezzenzadeh Ali Pasha, the Ottoman commander, was undeterred. His fleet boasted 278 ships, and Ottoman naval history was basically a highlight reel of victories. Plus, Captain Karakoja had misreported the Holy League's size as meh, which was about as helpful as a blindfolded scout. The Ottomans scrambled to mobilize soldiers and rowers, but their orders were so contradictory, they might as well have been written by a caffeinated octopus. A month slipped by in bureaucratic fog. Meanwhile, the Holy League fleet reached Cephalonia on October 3rd, scouted the Ottoman fleet on the 6th, and sailed to the Curzilari Islands like a choir of war-hardened angels. At dawn, the Ottoman fleet began to slither out of the Gulf of Patras, only to find the Holy League waiting like a well-dressed ambush. The stage was set for one of the most epic naval battles since Neptune first learned to swim. Commanded by Don Juan of Austria, the center was a fortress of floating fury. His flagship, La Real, was a 60-meter beast, backed by 24 large galleys and flanked by the slow but deadly Venetian galleasses. These ships were like floating castles with cannons that could turn galleys into driftwood. Facing them was Muezzenzadeh Ali Pasha, aboard the Sultana, leading 87 ships in a double center line. A land commander by trade, Muezzenzadeh lacked the naval finesse of Piale Pasha, but he had confidence, numbers, and a questionable formation. Led by Agostino Barbarigo, this wing had 54 Venetian galleys. Opposing him was Mehmet Sirocco, Bey of Alexandria, with 58 ships arranged in a flanking arc. Unfortunately, his arc was so thin it looked like a spaghetti noodle trying to hug a meatball. Commanded by Gianandrea Doria, this wing had 50 ships. But Uluç Ali, the Ottoman left commander, had brought a pirate party from Algiers, 101 ships strong. This was the Ottomans' sweet spot, and Uluç Ali was ready to dance. Before the clash, commanders led prayers, Don Juan before a crucifix on La Real, and Muezzenzadeh before a Sufi banner on Sultana. Muezzenzadeh even promised the rowing slaves their freedom if the Ottomans won. Spoiler, they didn't. Then, silence shattered. A cannon fired from Sultana, well out of range but loud enough to say, "Let's do this." The wind blew from the east, pushing the Ottoman ships forward. The galleasses, those lumbering giants of the Holy League, fired devastating volleys into the Ottoman advance, sinking several galleys before they could even say, Allah Akbar. Their high decks made boarding nearly impossible, neutralizing the Ottoman numbers. Yet, despite their thunderous entrance, the galleasses' overall impact remains debated. Were they game changers or just dramatic warm-up acts? Historians still squabble like tavern drunks over that one. Now pause for a sec. Step into the extraordinary. Subscribe to Eccentric Digital Pixel. Welcome to the wild frontier of creativity, where pixels pulse with imagination and every frame tells a story you've never seen before. We don't follow trends, we bend reality. Get exclusive access to jaw-dropping digital creations. Be the first to witness new drops by turning on notifications. Don't just scroll. Experience the pixel revolution. Smash that subscribe button and ring the bell to never miss a masterpiece. Because normal is boring, and you were born to see the world differently. As the battle began, the wind, that fickle mistress of the sea, decided to switch allegiances. Early on, it shifted direction, catching the Venetian galleasses off guard. These floating fortresses, magnificent but about as nimble as a drunken elephant on roller skates, were carried past the parted Ottoman lines like confused parade floats. Once out of position, they were about as useful as a cannonball in a pillow fight. Their thunderous opening salvo had been impressive, but now they were spectators to the carnage. On the Holy League's left, Mehmet Sirocco, the Bey of Alexandria, saw an opportunity. His smaller, shallower Ottoman galleys hugged the coast, slipping over sandbars like smug sea snakes. It was a daring flanking maneuver, textbook brilliance if you had the numbers. But Sirocco didn't. Enter Barbarigo, the Venetian quartermaster general of the sea, who was having none of it. 4 ships from the Holy League's vanguard swooped in like avenging angels, followed by 9 more from the reserve. Suddenly, Sirocco's galleys were surrounded, outnumbered, and about as coordinated as a goat ballet. Cut off from the main Ottoman fleet, Sirocco's right wing was now trapped between the Christian reinforcements and the unforgiving shore. The fighting was savage, a brutal melee of swords, screams, and splintering wood. With fewer Spanish tercio professionals on this flank, the Venetians bore the brunt, and it cost them dearly. In the thick of the chaos, Barbarigo, visor lifted to shout orders, caught an arrow straight through the eye. A poetic death, if poetry involved screaming in blood. His nephew, Marino Contarini, joined him in martyrdom shortly after, but not before crippling Sirocco's flagship with a final, defiant strike. But vengeance runs deep in Venetian veins. Giovanni Contarini, another kinsman, took up the family honor like a man possessed. He sank Sirocco's flagship, fished the wounded admiral from the water, and, in a moment that would make Shakespeare blush, beheaded him on the spot. The Ottoman right wing broke and fled, their morale shattered like a wineglass at a wedding brawl. Meanwhile, in the center, Muezzinzadeh Ali Pasha was channeling his inner knight. He steered his flagship, Sultana, straight into La Real, Don Juan's floating fortress. It was a bold move, the naval equivalent of challenging someone to a duel in the middle of a riot. The collision was thunderous. Galleys from both sides swarmed in, unloading soldiers like angry bees from a shaken hive. The fighting was hand-to-hand, blade to blade, and utterly merciless. The Spanish and Genoese tercio infantry, trained for this kind of brutal close-quarters combat, carved through the Ottoman ranks with grim efficiency. As if things weren't bad enough, the Ottoman center began to splinter. Ships broke formation, trying to find gaps in the Holy League's lines for a cheeky envelopment. But without enough support, these brave but isolated galleys were picked off one by one, like overeager chess pieces charging the queen. Had the center held long enough for Uluç Ali to crush the Christian left, the Ottomans might have snatched victory from the jaws of disaster. But after 2 hours of relentless fighting, Muezzinzadeh Ali Pasha lay dead, Sultana was captured, and the glorious Ottoman banner was hoisted as a trophy aboard La Real. The tide had turned, and it was crimson. On the Holy League's right, Gianandrea Doria faced the worst odds of all. His fleet was outnumbered 2-1, and his opponent was none other than Uluç Ali, the most cunning admiral in the Ottoman arsenal. Here the Christian losses were catastrophic. Several galleys were wiped out with no survivors, and the rest suffered grievous casualties. Battle was joined later on this flank, and by the time Doria engaged, the center was already a blood-soaked mess of shattered ships and floating corpses. Yet Doria held, barely, buying just enough time for the Holy League's victory to crystallize. While the Venetian chroniclers sharpened their quills to roast Gianandrea Doria for his cautious approach, which, in Venetian terms, meant not charging headfirst into a meat grinder, the Genoese, Spanish, and even a handful of Maltese galleys were busy doing the heavy lifting. These ships checked Uluj Ali's advance with the kind of grit that makes statues blush. Doria, ever the tactician, wasn't about to throw his men into a storm without a plan. But to the Venetians, who had brought the largest fleet and suffered the worst casualties, restraint looked suspiciously like cowardice. History, however, would be kinder to Doria than his critics. The Ottoman plan was simple. Use their oversized left wing to smash through the Holy League's right, and then swing around like a scimitar to gut the Christian center. But every minute of delay was a gift to the Holy League, a ticking clock that turned ambition into disaster. When the fleets finally clashed, the outer Venetian squadron, bless their hearts, broke and scattered like pigeons at a fireworks show. It was chaos. But by then, the north and center of the battle were already leaning heavily in favor of the Christians. As Uluj Ali broke through the Christian lines and began his grand flanking maneuver, he looked back and saw a sight that would make any admiral's stomach drop. La Real, Don Juan's flagship, and a host of galleys were now bearing down on him like divine retribution. To make matters worse, the wind had turned, now blowing from the west. A cruel twist of fate that trapped 30 Ottoman ships, still mobile but unengaged, in a watery cage. Only 8 ships, including Uluj Ali's own, managed to escape, rowing furiously into the wind with the Holy League hot on their heels. Behind them lay the wreckage of what had, just yesterday, been the most formidable fleet in the Mediterranean. Ottoman ships were either surrendering, burning, or being boarded and butchered. Uluj Ali would eventually gather 87 surviving ships and limp back to Constantinople. But the rest of the armada? Gone. Obliterated. Reduced to flotsam and legend in just 4 brutal hours. Despite being outnumbered, the Holy League had several aces up their sleeve. Superior firepower. The Christians had nearly a 2-to-1 advantage in guns, turning their galleys into floating death machines. Better infantry. The Spanish tercios and Genoese marines were seasoned professionals, trained for close-quarters combat. Strategic positioning. The Holy League's formation, bolstered by the galleasses and reinforced flanks, blunted the Ottoman assault. Wind advantage. The shift in wind direction trapped Ottoman ships and disrupted their maneuverability. But make no mistake, Lepanto was a bloodbath. Even the victorious Holy League lost over 8,000 men. The Venetians, who had brought the largest fleet, suffered the worst. On the Ottoman side, estimates soar as high as 40,000 dead. It was one of the bloodiest battles of the era, a maritime apocalypse. When news of the victory reached Christian Europe, it was met with shock and elation. The scale of the triumph gave Pope Pius V a celestial glow-up, elevating the papacy's prestige and breathing life into the Holy League, which had been signed just months earlier. Lepanto was immortalized in poetry, paintings, and pulpits as the ultimate clash of Christianity versus Islam. It was hailed as a turning point, a divine intervention on the high seas. But here's the twist. For all its glory, Lepanto's strategic impact was limited. The Holy League failed to capitalize on their victory. 2 years later, Pius V died, and Venice, battered and broke, sued for peace. The League dissolved. Cyprus was lost, and Venice had to pay a war indemnity. Next up, the Siege of Vienna. If you thought Lepanto was dramatic, wait until we get to the Siege of Vienna, where coffee, cannons, and croissants collide in a tale of siegecraft and salvation. Before you go, if you enjoyed this salty saga of ships and swords, don't forget to follow us, subscribe, click that notification bell, so you never miss another tale of intrigue, bloodshed, and historical brilliance. More epic stories are just over the horizon.